Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I'm Nicole Forbes with Dennis's 7Ds, and today we're going to talk about fertilizer. And I know that it's maybe not the most exciting topic to, satisfy some of your spring cravings. So of course I did bring some flowering plants in to help make the table pretty, because fertilizer is one of those utilitarian aspects of gardening. Fertilizing our plants is something that usually we've heard of, we know that we're supposed to do, but beyond that, there's a lot of mystery into all the choices that you may have, different fertilizer options, commercials that promise you that one's going to be better than the other. And so we often find need for helping make the best selection in the fertilizer department. And so I really just want to get everyone to feel a little bit more comfortable with feeding your plants, what it means to feed your plants, the different ways to feed your plants, and in many cases, which plants don't really need to be fed at all. We are seeing, here it is, spring. Yay, spring. It's spring of 2022. We're seeing price increases, inflation on, every aspect of our life in, food and grocery costs, housing, wages rising, and now we're also seeing an increase in even something as mundane as fertilizer. The cost, of course, and the rising cost of fertilizer is one of the things that's affecting our rising food prices, because, of course, farmers use quite a bit of fertilizer as inputs in order to increase crop yields. But with that being said, I guess, I also want to just kind of help us to determine where we should use our fertilizer dollars the most efficiently and effectively in our gardens, and where, again, maybe it's not as important at this time of year, or at this time. What is fertilizer? Well, so fertilizer is plant food. So fertilizer is really any material that you apply to the soil or give to a plant. Doesn't have to be necessarily soil. So given to a plant that enhances plant growth. Now, by the USDA, so United States Department of Ag, has created some laws and structures that most of us are aware of, at least the existence of. And one of the laws is that if it is a fertilizer, so if it is plant food, it has to have on the label 3 numbers. And 3 numbers you'll see on every bag here: 555, 842, here on this white bag, 15, 10, 10. So always 3 numbers are represented, indicating that this material is a plant fertilizer or plant food. Those 3 numbers are always in the same order and represent the same 3 primary nutrients that plants require for growth and that they use the most, which is why they often need to be replenished. So naturally, plants can grow from the sun. They eat sunlight and convert the energy from the sun into plant nutrients and energy to help them grow through the process of photosynthesis. But the process of photosynthesis requires other chemical components to be in existence to kind of create the equation that allows photosynthesis to occur. And those different chemical and elemental inputs come either from the air, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, can all come from the air, or through rain and rainwater, so our hydrogen, or available nutrients that are held within mineral deposits or organic matter that is in the soil. And that would be, again, more nitrogen, which can be held in the soil, or from decaying plant material or dead animal or animal waste, phosphorus, potassium, and on and on. Essential elements for plant growth, or those macronutrients, as I mentioned, used more regularly, relied upon for that photosynthesis process, and deficiencies in those macronutrients can cause adverse effects on the plant. So can decrease growth, affect plant leaf size, for example, stunt growth, cause yellowing of the leaves or discoloring of the leaves, known as chlorosis, and sometimes even just death, cell death. As always with classes that we teach here, or videos that we film here, the handout that is associated with this topic can be found linked just under the description of the video. So right up at the top, if you cannot find the handout, please just make a comment and we'll make sure and directly link it to you in the comment section. So macronutrients: carbon, as I mentioned, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. So those are the most important, most primary and macronutrients used by plants. Then there are micronutrients, or secondary nutrients. Think of it again as like we need more of our primary nutrients, things like proteins, for example, carbohydrates, than we do of minerals and vitamins, so to speak. Those can come in smaller quantities throughout our kind of nutritional journey, so to speak. So the micronutrients would include iron, manganese, boron, molybdenum, I have a really hard time with that, molybdenum, copper, zinc, chlorine, nickel, cobalt, sodium, and silicon. So again, micro or secondary nutrients versus the macro or primary nutrients. And in the soil, in addition to those macro or micronutrients, primary or secondary nutrients, within the soil, there's also a complex network of fungi and bacteria that comprise a probiotic, network that helps to metabolize and break down these raw ingredients and nutrients within the soil to make them available to plants, as well as the fungi can often extend the distance that a root system itself can reach by growing long, what's called hyphae, long filaments into the soil, attached to the root of a plant in one direction, and then sending out little feeder filaments into the soil as a fungal body can, to reach and access pockets of minerals that may be out of reach of the actual root system itself. So acting almost like, like Grubhub, basically, or, DoorDash could be a little fungi that says, oh, do you need some copper? Do you need some nickel over here? And you can't get it because the nickel is way over here. I'll get it for you in exchange for a little bit of sugar or a little bit of carbon that the plants are able to produce in excess and store in their roots. That's the benefit that the probiotics gain, is that they get a little bit of sugar or starch from the plant, but they can also benefit the plant by helping access and metabolize different nutrients within the soil. Fungus, when it makes this relationship with plant roots, is known as mycorrhiza, and you will see a lot of organic fertilizers have now incorporated these probiotic fungi and beneficial bacteria directly into the bags of fertilizer. So you will see just a basic, so here's my G&B starter fertilizer, and right above the numbers, fertilizer, up here it says contains beneficial soil microbes plus mycorrhiza. So that's the root associated fungus that we see making such a big difference in the soil. So now the organic fertilizers are kind of adding in a metabolism helper, those probiotics, which, let's face it, humans have, or most organisms have, a rich, diverse group of bacteria and fungus that live within our digestive system, within our bodies, that do an amazing array of things for us and for our physiology. We do know things like lactobacillus helps us to break down lactose, for example. So when we drink milk, we have the right flora in our bodies to help break that material down and make it digestible. So the same thing happens in the soil. The right fungi and bacteria will help make nutrients that are available in the soil more easily available to be taken up by the plants themselves. In many cases, we also see, beyond just acting as a nutrient facilitator or metabolizer of raw ingredients, the fungi and bacteria, the probiotics, also can often create like an armor or almost a coating on the outside of a root system to help protect it from pathogens like soil-borne bacteria that may otherwise adversely affect the root system. So they can help prevent diseases at the same time. All of the fertilizer that you see on the table here, all the fertilizer that you find on the shelves at your stores, not only will have the 3 numbers listed, and we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail here in a second, but they'll also have ingredients listed. So you can see what the nutrients have been derived from, so the source of that raw material. The ingredients will be different based on whether your fertilizer is a synthetic, kind of chemistry generated or synthetic manufactured fertilizer, or if it is an organic fertilizer that is a combination of more organic and raw material or raw nutrients. You will find that minerals like phosphorus, sulfur, potash are mined from the earth. They are crushed and sometimes chemically treated to make them more water soluble or available to plants. And then organic inputs such as manure, seaweed, blood meal. These are organic natural ingredients that are also either dried or otherwise processed for organic inputs in organic fertilizers. Industrial or synthetic fertilizers such as ammonia, or inputs like ammonium phosphate, urea, ammonium nitrate are, again, human produced synthetic materials that go through like industrial chemical reactions to help mimic those same raw materials that come out of the organic ingredients to emphasize or encourage plant growth. The numbers. What are the numbers? Really, this is, again, we stand there and we look at an aisle of fertilizer. In some cases, it's like choosing toothpaste. You've got 50 different choices. Really, most of them are going to get your teeth clean. So it's going with something that you're comfortable with, something that is either going to be available to you again to reapply, or storable, something that you can keep until you need to reapply it again. So a big bag or something with a sealable top is always nice. But the choices that you'll see range from colorful bags with bright pictures saying, this is a rose food, versus a big tomato on the bag showing you, that it should be applied to vegetable gardens or your, lawn fertilizer. So some of it is marketing to really kind of help pull your eye so that you don't have to worry about the numbers. But when you look at those numbers individually, as I mentioned, the 3 numbers on a fertilizer label, it's not a very good one to use, 3 numbers on a fertilizer label, 15, 10, 10 as an example, are always in the same order, and they always represent the 3 primary nutrients that plants use the most that get exhausted from the soil. First number is always nitrogen, second number phosphorus, third number potassium. You will frequently hear it referred to as NPK, so nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, always in that order. The 3 numbers themselves are percentages of that nutrient within the total fertilizer itself. And they can be expressed as ratios as well. So a 15, 10, 10, for example, is a 3-2-2 fertilizer. So if we were trying to break that ratio down, we're going to divide it by 5, right? So 5 goes into 15 3 times and into 10 2. So 3-2-2 is the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus and potassium. It has more emphasis on the nitrogen nutrient. So what is nitrogen? And what does nitrogen do? Nitrogen's role in plant growth is to promote leafy green vegetation. It's nitrogen is critical in the production of chlorophyll, which allows, again, plants to grow quickly. It's lawn food has, the majority of lawn food is nitrogen because we're not looking for our lawn to really make flowers or anything. So it's just got to grow green leaves. And then we cut off the green and then we want it to grow green again. So feeding a lawn on a regular basis is important. And usually, again, your lawn fertilizer will be emphasizing nitrogen or the first number as the biggest number. And we can see that in 2 different forms here. I have an organic lawn fertilizer made by G&B, and the numbers here are 8-1-1. So 8% nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, 1% potassium. Ultra Green Pennington lawn fertilizer here is a synthetic fertilizer. So we have our G&B organic with lower numbers, but still higher first number, higher nitrogen. Ultra Green lawn fertilizer synthetic has much higher numbers because the nutrients have been synthesized into a higher concentration chemically, but we're looking at 30-0-4. So again, way more of that nitrogen than we would have of phosphorus or potassium. In fact, there's no phosphorus at all in the Ultra Green fertilizer for lawns, and only 1% phosphorus in the G&B organic. Phosphorus, next number, that middle number, phosphorus role is initially for root development and root production. And once a plant has an established root system, phosphorus then plays a role in flower, fruit, and seed production. So we see a lot of phosphorus in vegetable fertilizer. Our starter fertilizer, which we also would see in bulb food, all has more phosphorus, or the middle number. So 3-5-2 for starter fertilizer, emphasizing that phosphorus. Or our bud and bloom or tomato vegetable herb, again, we're looking at 4-6-3 and 3-7-4 on bud and bloom. So that middle number for first, roots, starter, second, flower, fruit, and seed production, that's where we want to see the emphasis in feeding plants that we really want to flower or produce fruit. Now, the last number is potassium, the K. Potassium has a lot of roles to play in plant physiology and nutrition, but it's harder to like put your finger on. First of all, potassium is like a metabolism regulator. I think of it as kind of like holding keys to the cabinets where all of the nitrogen and phosphorus are locked up. If you don't have potassium's kind of regulating ability to say, you get nitrogen, you need some phosphorus, then potassium's role, then the plants may not have like the proper regulation of nutrients. So potassium's got that regulation role. Potassium also is responsible for cell structure and stem strength. So we think of plants sometimes, maybe they're floppy or not sturdy enough or stiff. So potassium can help to strengthen those cells and make them just a little bit sturdier in general. Potassium also is a stress regulator, so helps plants in their response to cold. So we can, potassium can help a plant become more cold hardy, more tolerant of stresses such as drought. And that then is important, for example, to emphasize as we get into some the heat of summer or winter months when our plants will be exposed to cold weather. So potassium on its own comes pretty freely from something such as kelp meal. So kelp meal, and again, I'm going to get into the kind of single ingredients, but then late in the season, if you say, oh gosh, I forgot to feed my XYZ plant, and I really think that it should have something before next spring, rather than giving it nitrogen, which would push leafy green growth, or even phosphorus, which we would see emphasizing fruit and flower. Instead, we want to give it mostly potassium to help kind of sturdy up its cell structure and help it with that stress regulation to get through the cold and potentially even drought of winter months. Not likely to be drought, but times are changing. So that's kelp meal gives us that potassium. So NPK, when we really simplify it and break it down, we say the first number is for everything leafy and green. Everything that grows up out of the plant is nitrogen. The second number is up and down. First, think root development, and then fruit, flower, and seed production. And then that final potassium is sort of just this all around good for you, the banana that you have for breakfast kind of thing. You just know that you need it. Up and down, all around are those three numbers, if that helps kind of just remember what we're doing here. The difference in application. So we've got organic fertilizer is typically, so organic or synthetic fertilizer can be either granular, so dried and applied to the plants by scattering around on the soil. That's like dry or granular fertilizer. Or it can be liquid, which is either liquid that's poured into and diluted into water, so a concentrate, or some liquid fertilizer starts out as a powder that then is added to water to dilute and then given to the plant in liquid form. So fertilizer can either be applied granularly or dry or liquid. The difference between those applications is important to consider. Granular fertilizer takes longer to break down and generally therefore feeds for a longer period of time versus liquid fertilizer, which is usually water-soluble nutrients. So they are plant available, but there's nothing, no reserve to keep feeding after the water-soluble nutrient has been processed by the plant. So liquid fertilizer, I think of it as like a cup of coffee or an energy bar. You get the energy right away from the nutrient, but it's not going to last you very long. So if you don't have a granular fertilizer to kind of back you up, and you're feeding off of just liquid alone, you need to really be on a consistent fertilizing schedule in order to make that consistency pay off. Otherwise, you see a plant that kind of is affected by peaks and lows, like someone who lives off of coffee and Snickers bars. So the difference again between granular and liquid fertilizer, we can use them both at the same time. Granular fertilizer can take as long as 3 weeks, for example, to break down. So something such as the starter fertilizer, we put it into colder soil. Chemistry occurs more rapidly in warmer soil conditions. And the warmer the soil gets, also the soil bacteria and fungi begin to become more active. And as those microorganisms in the soil become more active, they also start to process these nutrients more quickly, making them plant available. So nutrient-wise, the materials can often be, the ingredients can often be the same or very similar. In an organic, for example, all-purpose, where's my all-purpose? So liquid, organic, all-purpose ingredients are fish solubles. So this is a fish-based fertilizer, stabilized with phosphoric acid, reduced sugar molasses, that's to give a little bit of sugar for plants and to help with the odor of fish, kelp extract, and sulfate of potash. So that's the ingredients in the liquid organic fertilizer. The Miracle Grow, for example's ingredients, ammonium sulfate, potassium phosphate, potassium chloride, urea phosphate, boric acid, copper sulfate, iron. You get the point, right? So we have like fish and raw ingredient organic material sources versus synthetic sources, but still all becoming something that a plant can eat. So we have granular, we have liquid. We also have like time release or slow release. So Osmocote, for example, is a slow release synthetic fertilizer. The little granules of fertilizer are coated in like a synthetic coating on the outside. Makes them round little balls, and that synthetic coating slowly breaks down over time to allow the fertilizer to slowly become available to the plant, even though you've put it all there at one time. So it's not an instant feed of the whole thing. In fact, this feeds for up to 6 months, and this version of Osmocote feeds up to 4 months based off of the temperature of the soil. That coating or packaging that holds the nutrient in will slowly break down, and then what's inside becomes available to the plants. So we see that sometimes a slow release or a coating that makes an extended release period for the nutrition. We also have a difference in consistency. So most of the G&B and kind of average organic fertilizers are mealy. If you open the bag and look at them, they look sort of like cereal grains. So it's going to be a combination of like soy meal and flour and some oats and maybe a little bit of like wheat germ. That's what it all looks like. It's powdery and sort of dry and granular. But if I grabbed a handful of that and just tossed it into the air, it's so many different sizes of particles and things that some of it would just fly off in the wind, and some would probably come into my face, and some would land where I threw it. So to apply the granular fertilizer, we usually want to sprinkle it around on the soil, so being pretty close to the soil to put it down. Scratch it in just enough that we're kind of roughing up the soil surface to allow those beneficial microbes and nutrients kind of quick access to go straight down into the soil itself. And when you apply it around what's called the drip line of a plant. Now, if we look at this forsythia as an example, it's good to sit right. So if this forsythia were in the ground in your garden, you would not throw fertilizer around the base of the plant where the stems are going into the ground. Rather, you're going to find what's called the drip line. And the drip line would be if you take the outermost branches of a plant and draw an imaginary line down to the ground from there. A circle around the outer branches is where the active feeding roots are and what would be called the drip line. So we would actually put our fertilizer out into this section of soil rather than way up here into the base around the bottom of the plant. Pelletized fertilizer, which a lot of the synthetics are pelletized, so easier to just scatter, toss it and water it in and you're fine. You don't have to do the scratching or get down close to it. But there are organics that are also pelletized and make an easier throw and go type feeding so that, again, we can save some time and be more convenient. GMB Paradise Blend, which is 555, is that pelletized. They call it throw and go fertilizer. So not so wheat germy and oatmeal-y, but again, more individual little like rabbit food or, little pellets. Same with the organic version of the Portland Rose Society fertilizer as well. Now, synthetic, organic, dry, granular versus liquid. What are the numbers? Another factor that affects nutrient uptake and nutrient availability is the pH of the soil where a plant is growing. And the pH is whether it's acidic, neutral, or alkaline soil. We know that there are acid-loving plants, for example, here in the Pacific Northwest, rhododendrons, azaleas, ferns, our conifers, Japanese maples. These are acid-loving plants. They thrive in soil conditions where the pH is below 7, in soil that is not only acidic, but has a community of fungi that dominate acidic soil. So they live in and they like those acidic conditions, and that relationship that the fungi and the plants that prefer acidic soil have is what makes them all grow in a community together. When our soil becomes relatively acidic, certain nutrients become less and less available to plants, while other nutrients become more water soluble or more available. Iron is an example of a nutrient that is more available to acid-loving plants in acidic soil conditions. And so that deep, dark green that we associate with a lot of our kind of native plants is a good representation of that kind of iron content in the soil. We know that plants can show us signs that they are lacking in some of these basic nutrients. And those signs can come out in physical characteristics or physical traits. As I mentioned in the beginning, yellow leaves, stunted growth, smaller leaves, or discolored foliage. There's a term that we often hear called chlorosis. And chlorosis is a yellowing leaf, usually due to iron deficiency. And when that leaf yellows, we often see a mottled yellow leaf where the veining of the leaf still remains green, and in between the veins is what turns yellow. So this is a lemon leaf, for example, with chlorosis, and this is a healthy lemon leaf, showing you the deep green color that it should be. Now, this yellowing leaf is most likely lacking in iron, not necessarily nitrogen, which we also think of as green, but in iron. And that's, again, the indication of this vein greening and the yellow in between, the chlorosis. But now iron, we could either give the plant liquid iron, for example, or do a test of the pH of the soil to find out if, for example, possibly the pH has gone closer to neutral or even potentially alkaline, which would lock up iron that's already in the soil and make it unavailable to the plant. So by changing the pH, allowing it to be more acidic or more neutral, can often unlock or allow different nutrients that are already in the soil to become more plant available. So what does that mean? That means that rather than guessing on all of this, you could test your soil to get a baseline of what your pH is, for example. Or I have the really great kit that's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and pH, complete instructions on how to test and how to interpret the tests, and 10 tests of each nutrient or pH so that you can check multiple areas in your garden, for example, or test, make some amendments or changes, and then maybe at the end of this growing season, test again to see what results you've gotten. I highly recommend taking soil tests to know, again, like a baseline of what your soil pH is, how much nitrogen you have available in your vegetable garden before the beginning of the season, for example. Because you see all of the fancy labels, as I mentioned, bud and bloom and tomato and vegetable and starter, etc., if you really want to buy one bag and feed everything, go with an all-purpose fertilizer. All-purpose, good example, 444. All three numbers are the same or close to the same in an all-purpose fertilizer. So 444, 555. On a synthetic, you'll see triple 16 or 16, 16, 16. These are just no single nutrient, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, is emphasized. It's just a generous helping of whatever a plant might need. It is easy, though, to over apply nutrients which a plant won't process, won't need, and will just simply run off into our groundwater or lakes or streams. Think about like taking way too much vitamin C, for example. You know, you're sick, you're afraid you're gonna get sick, and you pound all the vitamins, and then of course, you know, you go to the bathroom and you have like electric pee because you're just putting all of that back out into the wastewater that your body can't process or can't absorb. So same kind of thing, if we over apply, if we apply too high of numbers on our fertilizer and then water our plants, we're going to see that just leach out into the waterways, and it's a waste of time, waste of money, and a waste of resources. In some cases, we even see adverse results of that runoff of fertilizer in algae blooms and pollution of our lakes and streams. So here in Lake Oswego, for example, and in various areas through Oregon, and I believe even like Idaho, there are restrictions on phosphorus in lawn fertilizer specifically. So back to our Pennington Ultra Green 3004, zero phosphorus is because so much fertilizer is applied, everywhere onto lawns all over, and then watered constantly, that the water runoff, when lawns don't need very much phosphorus in the first place, unless they're new lawns, because remember, phosphorus is for root development and fruits, flowers, and seeds. Well, lawns, once they have roots, really have no business making fruits, flowers, or seeds. So lawn fertilizer for an established or mature lawn does not need that middle number. And we have seen that the adverse effects with it running off into the waterways has created some restrictions and regulations in various cities, states, municipalities that limit or actually prohibit phosphorus in fertilizers. And we also see phosphates, for example, in dishwashing liquid soap and those kinds of things. So it's probably not new to you to hear that phosphates cause some issues, but here we see them in our lawn fertilizer. Now, the GMB organic lawn fertilizer 811 does have 1% phosphorus, but the 1% phosphorus in this is non-water soluble phosphorus, which means that it goes down into the soil and becomes plant available, not water soluble to run off into our groundwater. If you do a pH test and you find that your soil is more acidic than the plants that you want to grow in it, then you need to apply a pH balancer. So to sweeten or bring acidic soil closer to neutral or alkaline, you're going to use lime. Lime also contains calcium, which, if you remember back to the beginning, is one of those primary nutrients as well. So calcium carbonate, lime can sweeten or raise the pH of your soil. It takes a while for it to become effective, so it's not a quick fix. pH changing is not a quick fix or a quick process. If your soil is too neutral or alkaline and you need to make it acidic for ferns or rhododendrons or blueberries or a gardenia, you're going to use elemental sulfur for organics, or cottonseed meal is another good acidifier for organics. And then this hydrangea blue is the synthetic version of an acidifier. This is derived from elemental sulfur, and ironically, blue hydrangeas are that color because of the effect of the pH on their flowers in the soil. So a hydrangea that's treated with lime, the following season will have flowers that are pink or pinker, versus a hydrangea that is treated with aluminum sulfate, hydrangea blue. Those flowers will tend to be blue or more intensive blue, and then kind of change depending on the pH of the soil itself. Most plants are happy growing in a pH range between 6.5 and 7. That's like average potting soil is going to be pH balanced to 6.5. And that's sort of the sweet spot where most of the micro and macronutrients that are available in the soil become available to the plants or are soluble chemistry-wise. If you want to take a more advanced approach to your soil testing, we do provide a link in the handout to A&L Western Agricultural Laboratories, which is a local testing source for the Portland metro area. If you're outside of Portland metro area, best thing to do would be to contact like Master Gardeners or your extension agency and find out who they recommend locally for soil testing. And you're going to get some information on how to take the soil test from them, scoop some soil into a baggie or a container and mail it off, and then wait for results to be sent to you. Now, even houseplants, of course, as you know, most of us know, also need fertilizer, but typically there are more formulas that are generated for houseplants than for our garden plants. I did bring in some houseplant fertilizers, showing you again difference between a few of them. We've got an all-purpose, oh, there's my all-purpose. So just general liquid plant food, 10, 10, 10. This is synthetic. The ingredients we're talking about: urea, ammonium phosphate, and muriate of potash. These are our ingredients in the basic 10, 10, 10. This is like for everybody, anybody, nothing special. Then we go to liquid orchid food or liquid cactus food. Both very different numbers on their labels. 9, 7, 9 on orchid food. Plenty of nitrogen, plenty of potassium, and a little less phosphorus, which you would think maybe orchids would need more flower power, but again, this is formulated for orchids, so this is what they want. Bonide liquid cactus plant food, 2, 7, 7. Not a lot of nitrogen, because we don't need a cactus to do a bunch of leafy green growth. We want it to be kind of slow and stay small like a cactus should, but plenty of phosphorus and potassium for that root development, as well as its ability to kind of maintain and cope with drought and stress and cold. Now, which plants should be fertilized? I mean, do we go out and we feed everything all the time? No. New plantings definitely should be fertilized. Anything that goes in that is young and new has a small and immature root system that can't take advantage of all of the nutrients that are available in its surroundings or in the soil. So we typically plant a new plant either with fertilizer in the hole, or we feed as it's kind of waking up and getting established in its position. New plants should be fertilized for at least the first 2 years, maybe even 3 years of their life, until they have become more established in their root system, have more resources, so to speak. Other plants that need to be regularly fertilized would include annuals. So your hanging baskets, your flower pots, petunias, geraniums, things that are just going to flower for 1 year and then die. They use up a lot of energy, and so we want to keep them performing by giving them the nutrients to give them that energy. Similar to annuals would be annual vegetables. So tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, eggplants, lettuce, spinach, corn. The vegetables that we put a lot of hope in to get a good productive yield, we need to give them the nutrients to be able to provide that yield. So definitely on a regular basis, we're feeding annuals, annual vegetables. And then there are a few other plants that are known to be hungry. Heavy feeders, sometimes we call them. Roses are a good example of a heavy feeding plant. They need a regular resupply of nutrients throughout the growing season to perform like we would expect them to, so for peak performance. In addition to roses, another known heavy feeder, as I'd mentioned kind of earlier, gardenias. Gardenias want the acid soil and acid fertilizer that helps them to get that deep green leaf, metabolize the iron that's in the soil, and to produce their flower buds properly, comes from that kind of constant supply of acidic fertilizer. Beyond that, it's not a bad idea to, lawns. Lawns are another one that, again, we need to fertilize our lawns because we're growing the lawn, and then usually we are mowing it off. And if we bag up the lawn clippings and send them off to the compost bin or to the yard debris recycling, we have no nitrogen, no nutrient recycling, so we need to put it back somehow, and that's usually done in the form of fertilizing. Now, soil applications, amending your soil, adding compost, for example, adding mulch, doing cover crop plantings in the off season. All of these different practices can also raise different nutrients and nutrient levels within your soil. Cover crop is known as green manure. When we, chop it down and turn that kind of live biomass or plant material into the soil, it's breaking down and becoming nitrogen that's available to the plants again. So different practices that you may undertake throughout the season or in prep for the season, such as mulching, amending, cover cropping, can help mitigate your need to fertilize through the growing season. And just as such, whether it's in the ground, plants that are growing in our clay soil here in the Willamette Valley, clay soil's got lots of nutrition and it tends to hold it pretty well, as opposed to growing in sandy soil conditions. Maybe you're out at the coast with a lot of sand and water's running through and the sand's draining really quickly and there's nothing holding the nutrient in place. So a lot of it is leaching out or flushing out of the soil. So depending on your soil type and your growing conditions, be it in ground versus raised beds or container plantings or even hanging baskets, those out of the ground applications, raised beds, containers, hanging baskets, are watered more frequently, which means that the nutrient, especially water soluble nutrient, is flushed out of the soil, maybe even faster than the plant can use it. And so we need to be sure that we are watering and fertilizing in those applications on a more consistent or regular basis. What do I do at home? Let's use my vegetable garden as an example. When planting, I've usually taken a soil test, so I know right about where my nutrient levels are. When planting my tomatoes, as an example, I'm going to use the tomato vegetable herb fertilizer. This is organic, which is what I prefer in my food garden especially. I'm going to follow the label. The label is law, and the label tells us for a tomato new planting, mix 1.5 cups per 10 square feet of growing area, or 6 cups for 50 feet of planting row. So I can either break that down or I can sprinkle 1.5 cups in my 10 square feet of planting row, or 3 by 3, which tends to be about the space a tomato is going to grow, right? 3 by 3. So 1.5 cups in the bottom of the hole or mixed over top, mixed in. Dig my hole, plant my plant, cover it up, water it. This feeds for about 6 weeks. So 6 weeks later, I'm going to reapply on the top of the soil the granular fertilizer, scratch it in a little, and water it in again. 6 weeks later, I will feed again. So if we're putting our plants in, let's say in the second week of May, I'm going to feed them again at the end of June or early July, and I'm going to feed again possibly early or mid-August, and that's going to get me the end of the season, take me to the end of the season on a tomato. So feeding a vegetable garden and reapplying that granular fertilizer every 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending on whether you're in the ground or in containers, what you would feed a little bit more frequently. In between that application of the granular fertilizer, if my plants look yellowing or showing me signs that they are lacking in nutrients or not performing as I would hope, I can give them liquid fertilizer, which I know is quickly available to the plants but doesn't last very long. High bloom, for example, 131 can help stimulate flush of flower production or fruit set versus high growth for 0-2, which can help green up a plant or to help push something like spinach that's maybe wintered over, looks a little yellow this time of year. We can help green up those leaves and get it to kind of respond to spring growth by giving it some of the nitrogen available in this high growth blend. Now, if your soil test, for example, shows that you are just lacking in one of the 3 primary nutrients, then you don't need to necessarily apply a fertilizer that has all of them blended together. You can simply raise that one nutrient by using what we call simple or single ingredients. So this is blood meal. Blood meal is exactly what it sounds like. It is just dried blood from slaughterhouses or rendering factories. Blood meal is 1300, so all nitrogen in blood meal. Blood meal is a lot of nitrogen, for example, and can actually burn a plant with too strong of nutrient concentration. So we want to be careful when we use blood meal. Always follow the directions, but this would be a way to only supply nitrogen instead of using a blended fertilizer that is applying all of the different ingredients. Similarly, as I mentioned at the end of the season, you don't want to give all that nitrogen. You don't want to see a plant grow when it should be going to sleep, but we do want to give it some enhanced ability to cope with stress or cold. Then we're going to give it something like kelp meal, which is 2.5% potassium, but about 0.5% of the nitrogen and the phosphorus. And lastly, where do you get mostly phosphorus from would be something like bone meal. So bone meal, we often see it as the suggested fertilizer for bulb planting because bulbs are basically great big roots. So we're going to give them something to really help support and emphasize that big root by giving them primarily phosphorus. 3% nitrogen, no potassium. Bone meal is where you would just deliver a nice phosphorus package, so to speak. Now, most of the granular fertilizer can be turned into liquid. So if you look at the label, again, lots of great information on the label. Read the whole label, all different sides. You see ingredients, you see a list of probiotic populations, so what strains of bacteria or fungus are present. The labels on probiotics also always have an expiration date. So actually stamped, just like on your yogurt or food, stamped on the package itself, we see this is good until 6/29/2023. And the expiration date on these organics is because of the probiotics. What am I pointing at? Because of the beneficial bacteria and fungus and mycorrhiza that are in there. Those are living organisms that can only live so long in the package. But once they go out into the garden, they have a food source and they can reunite with their plant friends and make those associations that are beneficial to both of them that go on in the soil. So the label will tell you fertilizer T and foliar feeding and deep root feeding. So how to turn the granular into a liquid to make more plant available or readily available to the plants right away. That's it. That's our fertilizer talk. Hopefully I've answered more questions than I have created for you. But if you have some questions, feel free to put them into the comment section, and we will do our best to answer all of them by the end of the day today. If you are in need of fertilizer, do come down and see us. We will both help you interpret a soil test and help you make the best decision for the plants that you have at home. With that being said, get out there into the garden, everyone. Happy gardening.